He was a king, born to rule an empire with the sacred duty of a nation in his hands. But a forbidden passion for a twice-divorced American socialite would threaten to send it all crashing down. This is the story of a love affair that triggered a constitutional crisis, was obsessively tracked by spies, and forced a king to make an impossible choice: the crown or the woman he loved. This is the unforgettable story of King Edward VIII and Wallis Simpson. Long before he was king, Prince Edward, known to his family as David, was the most eligible bachelor on the planet. As the Prince of Wales, he was charismatic, modern, and wildly popular. He toured the empire, served in World War I, and seemed to represent a fresh, more accessible kind of royalty. His father, the stern King George V, had successfully guided the monarchy through a world war that saw other European dynasties fall. He was a man who believed in duty, tradition, and the rigid protocols of the crown. Edward, however, found it all suffocating. He carried on a series of affairs with married women, much to his parents' dismay. He much preferred the buzz of nightlife and the company of a fast, fashionable crowd to the stiff formality of court. His father was so deeply concerned, he famously predicted, "After I am dead, the boy will ruin himself in 12 months." It was a prophecy that would turn out to be eerily accurate. The prince was popular, no doubt, but he was also restless, impatient, and looking for something the gilded cage of royalty just couldn't offer. He was a prince who deep down had little desire to be king. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Bessie Wallace Warfield was born into a respectable but not particularly wealthy Baltimore family. Sharp, ambitious, and impeccably stylish, she was determined to make her own way. Her first marriage to a U.S. Navy pilot was an abusive relationship that ended in divorce. Her second was to Ernest Simpson, a British-American shipping executive whose business brought them to London. It was here, in the heart of the British Empire, that Wallis Simpson blossomed into a prominent socialite. She wasn't a classic beauty, but she had a magnetic confidence and a sharp wit that drew people in. In 1931, at a party hosted by his then-mistress, Lady Thelma Furness, the Prince of Wales first met Wallis. At first, they were just friends, but when Lady Furness traveled abroad, she made the fateful mistake of asking Wallis to keep an eye on the prince. By 1934, it was an open secret in their social circle that they were lovers, all while Wallis was still married to Ernest. Wallis was unlike anyone Edward had ever met. She wasn't impressed by his title and treated him like a man, not a future monarch. His official biographer later noted he became slavishly dependent on her. For a prince who felt crushed by the weight of formality, her irreverence was intoxicating. The affair between the Prince of Wales and a married American quickly became a matter of grave concern at the highest levels of the British establishment. King George V and Queen Mary met Wallis once, but were so appalled they refused to ever receive her again. Even before he was king, Edward's affair was being monitored. His own father, King George V, authorized Scotland Yard to watch the prince, fearing he was being blackmailed. Police detectives tracked their every move, opened their mail, and listened to their phone calls, convinced Wallis was a professional hustler after money and influence. Edward, however, was head over heels. He showered Wallis with extravagant gifts, including jewels worth a fortune. While the British press, out of deference to the monarchy, kept a lid on the story, the foreign press had no such filter. Newspapers in America and Europe were filled with scandalous stories and photos of the heir to the British throne and his married American lover. Things took a dramatic turn on January 20th, 1936, when King George V died. Prince Edward became King Edward VIII. The very next day, in a stunning break with all protocol, he watched the official proclamation of his own accession from a window at St. James's Palace, with the still-married Wallis Simpson right there with him. The message couldn't have been clearer. He wasn't giving her up. To the government and the royal family, the unthinkable suddenly became obvious. The new king intended to marry her, As king, Edward was now the supreme governor of the Church of England. At the time, the Church absolutely forbade the remarriage of any divorced person if their former spouse was still alive. Wallis didn't just have one living ex-husband. She was in the process of divorcing her second. For the head of the Church to marry a twice-divorced woman was a constitutional and religious impossibility. The government, led by Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin, was horrified. They, along with the leaders of the British dominions like Canada and Australia, were completely opposed to the marriage. They argued that a twice-divorced American was socially and politically unacceptable as a queen consort. There were also growing whispers and security concerns about Wallis's character and her suspected sympathies for Nazi Germany. Desperate to have it all, Edward proposed a workaround, a morganatic marriage. This would let him stay king, while Wallis would become his wife but not queen, holding a lesser title. Any children they had wouldn't be in the line of succession. But the British cabinet and the Dominion governments flatly rejected the idea. The crisis peaked in November 1936. Prime Minister Baldwin gave the king a stark choice: Wallis Simpson or the throne. There was no middle ground. For a man who had always felt trapped by his royal duty, the choice, while agonizing, was perhaps inevitable. The story of Edward and Wallis is a powerful reminder of how personal desire can collide with public duty, changing the course of history forever. If you find these hidden royal stories fascinating, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into the dramatic lives of history's most compelling figures. On December 10, 1936, after a reign of just 326 days, King Edward VIII signed the formal instrument of abdication. His three younger brothers stood by as witnesses, including Prince Albert, the shy, stammering man who never wanted to be king, but would now be thrust onto the throne as King George VI. The next evening, Edward, now a prince once more, addressed the nation and the world in a historic radio broadcast. His words echoed across the globe. "You must believe me when I tell you that I have found it impossible to carry the heavy burden of responsibility and to discharge my duties as king as I would wish to do without the help and support of the woman I love." His brother, the new King George VI, made him Duke of Windsor. But in a move that would cause a lifetime of resentment, the king, with the backing of his mother Queen Mary and wife Queen Elizabeth, issued letters patent that denied Wallis the title of Her Royal Highness upon her marriage. In June 1937, after Wallis's second divorce was final, the couple married in a quiet ceremony in France. Not a single member of the royal family attended, a snub that deeply wounded the Duke. And so began their life in exile, a glamorous but ultimately empty existence as international socialites drifting between Paris and New York. The Duke and Duchess of Windsor were never able to escape the shadow of the abdication. Their loyalties were openly questioned during World War II. A controversial visit to Nazi Germany in 1937, where they met Adolf Hitler, only fueled accusations that they were Nazi sympathizers. Fearing he was a security risk, Winston Churchill appointed the Duke as governor of the Bahamas, a post he held for the duration of the war, essentially to keep him far from Europe. After the war, the couple lived out the rest of their days in France, in what amounted to permanent retirement. They hosted lavish parties and became icons of style, but the Duke was never offered another official role. They remained a source of intense fascination and controversy, a couple defined by the one decision that had cost them an empire, but won them each other. Edward died from throat cancer in 1972. It was only then, when Queen Elizabeth II visited him shortly before his death, that she met the Duchess in person. Wallis lived for another 14 years, becoming increasingly reclusive and suffering from dementia. When she died in 1986, she was buried alongside her husband in the royal burial ground at Frogmore, near Windsor Castle, a final, quiet return to the family and the institution they had so famously left behind. The abdication of King Edward VIII wasn't just a royal scandal. It was a constitutional earthquake that remade the British monarchy. It forced the institution to grapple with the clash between ancient duty and modern desire, a conflict that still echoes in the royal family today. The story of Edward and Wallis leaves behind a complicated and hotly debated legacy. Was he a traitor who abandoned his sacred duty for a selfish passion? Or was he a romantic hero who gave up everything for love? The truth is likely somewhere in between. But what's certain is that their shocking romance, an affair that brought an empire to the brink, remains one of the most dramatic chapters in the long, turbulent history of the British crown.